almost 7,000 Nash press articles, it was found that 29% of
Good evening.
Just like that.
Just like that, here I am. I've got a cat here that's just basically just rubbing it in my face that she exists at this point, which is mildly frustrating. Good evening. We'll just have some small talk. Let me know if the audio is okay, if there's any issues, and I will endeavour to rectify them as soon as possible. Yes, I have lost weight, everyone. Thanks for all the compliments. Not. I tell you something, man. Seeing yourself fat on the telly will you'll enter a caloric deficit pretty rapidly. The camera adds a few pounds, your head adds a few pounds, but so does eating 300-gram protein bars every morning. And not entering all those flat whites into your calorie counter. Hello, Stephen. Good to see you, mate. I was just thinking about you today, listening to your piece for my album and my headphones today. In fact, I've lost the version of it that you sent me that doesn't have Robin Williams talking over it. So I'll need to get that back off you. So that's just a bit of music related business. I'm a musician as well, you see. I'm a renowned Scottish musician as well, you see. I mean, we got 22 people. Oh, yes, my wife's here. People will be wanting to know what we did on our anniversary. The canals were shut, so I took her up the M6. Okay. If you want to do me a wee favour, guys, as well, jump on your socials. Tell people to jump over. We'll kick off in about 5 minutes. That's probably my favourite episode. There are aspects of it that I found personally quite challenging, like saying, just for going for a pee, you got hit with a P45. But I can't dig my heels in every time. I particularly enjoyed that episode because that's when I began to get a sense that we were pushing some of the boundaries of what you might often see on television regarding social class. Very strong imagery of the Thatcher years and the riots, making some difficult points around armed forces recruitment, trying to negotiate all that with appropriate levels of sensitivity, obviously. And also getting phrases like Thatcher spawn and parasitic elite right in there. I know some people might think it was a bit skewed in terms of being quite heavily focused on aspects of conservative policy, but really it's a legitimate reading of recent political history. So I think in that sense, it's legitimate journalism with a bit of my own editorial in there. Someone says they know Tom Bell, the polo guy. He is a really lovely guy. Yeah, he is. This is the thing. I'm writing a chapter. I'm finished writing a chapter about conservatism and Tories. Basically, a section of my book is called the Hostility Doctrine, which just examines recent welfare reforms and tries to kind of pinpoint what the theme is between the reforms in welfare, the reforms in the economy, the reforms in immigration. And it all comes down to one theme, which is hostility, which is a kind of the emotional nature of what these policies do. They arise from a belief that you can change human behaviour through punitive action and threatening people and using social incentives to discourage certain types of behaviour. But at the same time, the part of the book also goes into my experience of dealing with conservative-minded people in my own life, and learning that while for many in society those policies that come from aspects of conservatism do not seem like they were created with the intent to help people. Often they are, and this speaks to how woefully some people misunderstand social reality in Britain. Anyway, I won't spoil it anymore. Right, okay, 5 past. We've got 40 people in. That's okay. First question, Anthony Mack. Do you think independence would give us more financial fairness? No. Independence would give us the option to make decisions that might create more financial fairness. This is the key thing to understand. And also that would come with a certain financial burden, which would make those decisions more difficult. However, they would be our decisions in Scotland, and that's, I think, for many the point. a lot is made of the risk of becoming independent. But if you look at some of the risks that have been taken within the union, the risk presented by moving to a free market economy as quickly as we did, which consigned millions to poverty and idleness and addiction, that was a big risk. What about the 17 billion in welfare cuts that George Osborne went through with in the years of austerity? That's twice what the deficit in Scotland would be if we became independent. That was a big risk. That's resulted in an estimated 130,000 deaths. So there is no path without risk. The question is, do we want to perform the risk assessment ourselves? I think it was a bit of a risk when Thatcher used a lot of our money from the oil. And I don't say ours as in Scotland, as in our oil. I just mean that was a British resource. It was not wisely used. It was used to fund tax cuts. It resulted in social mobility for some. And then at the same time, it resulted in what is ultimately Thatcher's definitive legacy, which is despair, death, and social dysfunction. So again, that's the view from East Kilbride. When's the album dropping? Enjoying the series so far, man. Going to watch tonight's episode on iPlayer. All right, Subs, how's it going, bro? Good to see you getting back in action. Your social media activity suggests you're getting focused on things, and that's good to see. It's been a tough few years for you, pal. The album is dropping. I don't really want to give a date, but it will be this year. I was listening to a rough cut of it today. Some of it's still in instrumental form, but I've settled on the sequence and I've settled on the instrumentals. And this is after having purchased a vulgar amount of instrumentals for it. It's not, you're not going to hear of many Scottish hip hop albums which effectively have a research and development budget. It's quite the size of what I've spent on this, but I think next time I'll set myself a budget and then operate within that, because I didn't really foresee. I started making this album before I had money, and then I realised I could buy any beat I wanted, and I just bought loads of instrumentals. So that complicated the process, but I've renamed it. It's not going to be called I Wish I Was Dead now. It's going to be called I'll Give You Something to Cry About, which alludes to some of the themes. It'll be passing commentary on trauma. It'll be passing commentary on some of the aspects of the kind of what you hear is called the culture war. You know, and this, the proliferation of the word trauma in relation to things that occur on social media, which I think is a different people have different thresholds for what constitutes harm and abuse. And obviously it'll be about class. I'm just working on some interludes just now. I have a couple of tracks to finish writing. But it's coming together nicely, and when it comes out, you'll know that I gave it absolutely everything that I could. Let's get some of these questions looked at. McAlpine and the benefit fraud versus tax evasion. Can we not have a primetime TV show called Tax Dodgers Mansion? I've already jokingly pitched some of these ideas, you know, a version of the Jeremy Kyle show. I did have 20-minute bit in my Fringe show, where like an alternative drunk version of me comes on and proposes a Jeremy Kyle style show, which involves taking the Prime Minister out of Downing Street and throwing him in Pilton on a Friday night and telling him to become Prime Minister again from there, just to test his theory of meritocracy. And while he's doing that, we take all his cabinet ministers and we just give them verbal abuse for all of the responsibility that they haven't taken for all of the fuck-ups. You know, including being full of coke when they were advocating in newspapers for tougher drug policies. And today I was doing some research for this chapter, and I found this old speech of Michael Howard, who was the Home Secretary from 1993 to 1997 in the John Major's government. He's famous for being unable to answer a simple question after being asked it repeatedly by Jeremy Paxman about 12 times, a yes or no answer. Anyway, he did this speech about prison reform, and in it he says, prison works, and we'll be building 6 more prisons, and I can guarantee you this, Butlins will not be getting the contracts. That's what he said at a Conservative Party conference. Now, as a kid who went to Butlins on holiday, that's quite offensive, to me. What was also funny is that after him insisting that prison works, he then became famous for a spate of high-profile prison breaks, which happened subsequently after his comments. So there you go. Is this an exclusive about your new LP? Oh, these are some of this information I'm giving is new. I did announce the title change the other day and reposted the front cover. I have production on there from Jim Sutherland. Actually, it's great in terms of the sound. There's a lot of traditional Scottish sounding stuff on it, but it has a hip hop kind of feel. A lot of live instrumentation on it. There's also some quality hip hop, just good old fashioned hip hop on it as well. What's your advice for someone sitting in a decent situation financially but feels helpless in the fight to provide more equality? I'm sick of getting angry but not having the guts to get out there. The best thing you can do is look for organisations that already exist. This is the thing. Sometimes, see, when people who maybe have a bit of money or maybe have done okay and they want to do something, partly because they're already starting from a position of confidence and privilege, and I'm not meaning you specifically, Liam, then what they do is they launch into action without first considering that maybe there are already people who exist who have been engaged in such action for a long time, and they could just do with some extra help, financial help, logistical help, trade unions, tenants unions. That's a big one right now. These are organisations which are very localised in many ways, deal with very specific types of problems, but they stack up victories pretty quickly when more and more numbers join. I donate a portion of a tiny portion, has to be said, but 15 quid, 20 quid a month to a tenants union is a lot for them. That's money they can bank on. And this kind of this kind of activism needs to be paid for, needs to be supported. I support it in different ways. I like to try and lend a bit of extra visibility to some of the things. I work mostly in isolation. I'm most effective that way. I supplement what a lot of other people are doing. Sometimes I'll get involved in specific campaigns, but largely I think my role within any kind of movement or any kind of drive for social justice or equality is to bring that public visibility to things and to be in conversations at the editorial level of media, where you can have an influence on what's covered and how it's covered, as you see from these shows. I think I saw something from Wally Bell there. What I've noticed about class is that upper class seem to be the ones that don't think that class exists. And actually, actually, that's when you start hanging around more upper class, you start to understand conclusions that they've arrived at about society make sense based on their experience and based on interests, which subtly shape their views on things. So when you get to the upper class level, or say a Sir Tom Hunter level, people tend to think that class is about making a value judgment about people. So the conception of class at that level is entirely different. It's not this relationship to the labour market, or do you own stuff, or do you rent stuff kind of thing. People see class as making a value judgment. So a lot of people reject the language of class because they don't like the implication that by talking about it, they might be judging someone for being inferior as a result of class. But that in itself says something about what they think. So the job we have is to, in some cases, be persuasive, where it seems like dialogue might bear fruit, and in other cases, to use other means to compel people to respond regardless of what they believe. And that's partly what these mutual aid collectives like trade unions are for. You hear a lot of people now talking about, the young lady at St Andrews said that, she says, it's privileged people have to acknowledge their privilege, but that's what trade unions ultimately exist for. That's an insurance policy that's taken out against the idea that some powerful people or employers or whatever, they might not be in the mood to acknowledge their privilege. So when you band together and withdraw your labour, thus removing the means for them to extract profit, then this tends to make some people more inclined to pay attention to what you have to say. And that's really the point. An interesting thing about trade unions, although the image of trade unionism has taken a bit of a beating since the Thatcher years, and I do think it has had its excesses in the past, and you do get people with massive egos, and you do get, shifty characters in all levels of society and all movements. So I'm not, but what's interesting when you talk to trade union activists, despite the fact the left has this image right now of being this hyper idealistic, impossibly moral, political ideology, when you speak to trade unionists, they tend to talk about what they're doing in the way that a military strategist would talk about what they're doing. So it's just a numbers game. If you have an employer that's bargaining with a bunch of fragmented individuals who are likelier to accept poor conditions and poor pay and what have you, then that's not necessarily in the interests of those people. But if you can create a consciousness around which they can situate themselves and they become organised and willing, then that results in things like the 40-hour week. That results in things like breaks. And these are all things that working class people fought for, and sometimes died for, hung in the street. That's a reality. Do you think class is more noticeable in cities compared to rural areas? I only ask from childhood experiences, going to primary school in rural Highland communities, all classes mixed. Poverty presents differently in different areas. And this was something that I learned on the more about on the first series that I did, Darren McGarvey, Scotland, where we did a lot of stuff in the borders. You might not see as social problems, and so this might force you to conclude that there's no poverty there to speak of. The poverty in rural areas tends to revolve around being geographically dislocated from employment opportunities or services such as job centres, mental health services. And so in the context of austerity, when there have been cuts, then we see that the poverty there has been exacerbated as well. Going for a job interview from one borders town to the next could involve a whole day of travel. And if you miss a bus, you're fucked. And this could be quite an expensive pursuit if you're on, 90 quid a week getting paid out fortnightly or whatever. What are your thoughts on Tom Hunter's community work? Do you think his philanthropy can help reduce inequality? Personally felt uneasy about his comments of judging people if they're doers. Tom's a nice guy. I've met him a few times. He is a businessman, and business-minded people have a specific thing that they are looking for when they're thinking about investing anything. His rights to decide that he's not, if you've investment of 50,000, which one of these people do I think at this particular moment would represent the better investment? Not necessarily for a return for him financially, but some kind of social or community return further down the line. But the idea that philanthropy it can offset inequalities is based to falsehoods and assumptions. One, that rich people understand better than anyone how a windfall should be distributed and what causes are worthy and which aren't. And secondly, the reason people are so willing to give so much of their money away, I think, is because maybe they're not being taxed heavily enough. So I can think of one way to deal with that. Darren, enjoyed the show. Thanks, David. Council tax where I live in Clackmannanshire, 1 in 5 homes get a debt collector letter regarding council tax each year. Yet we vote twice for SNP to scrap it. I know this is a bugbear of mine. I voted for the SNP way back. And then obviously when they get in power, then it's too complicated and it's a pass the buck kind of scenario where they say, well, we were going to reform it and Labour stopped us. And I think at the end of the day, a regressive form of taxation, like the council tax, is regressive because it's unequal. Therefore, it benefits people with big houses and money more so than people who don't. And if you want to win elections, it's a hard sell because the people who are guaranteed to turn up and vote are the people with a wee bit of dosh. Does education really get people ahead that come from underprivileged areas? It gets them further ahead than they might be if they didn't go into education. The question is, does it put them on a fair footing with people who get a better education? The answer is mostly no. I think the pandemic's really revealed what education, state education, is for. Primarily, if you're just looking at it dispassionately in terms of what the material outcomes of it are and not all of these platitudes about education being this amazing thing, which obviously it could be. State education provides two basic functions. One is it socializes people into the society and they learn and are engendered with the necessary requirements in order to function within that society, whether it's acquiring language, reading skills, basic mathematics, but also an understanding of authority and behavioural expectation. So that's important. And what people learn in that condition, varies from education system to education system. The other thing is about preparing people for the labour market. And also about preparing people to accept that labour market. So you don't get a lot of education about what the actual dynamics of the labour market are. That all happens if you get into your third year at university, then you're allowed to have an opinion on that. But the other aspect of it is school allows parents to work, both parents. So public education, state education is quite a recent phenomenon. And at different points, depending on what the level of political ambition, the level of investment, then it's been a very good leveler, or at least a form of propulsion for people from lower class backgrounds. But I think the pandemic really, I think, has revealed some of the more basic functions of school, which is your kids get looked after so you can go and be economically active. Which people might think is a cynical thing for me to say. Some people might think that. But look at the economic slowdown that has occurred as a result of schools being closed in part, Anastasia, very true about philanthropy, which basically a Victorian idea. A lot of Victorian ideas still doing the rounds, eh? Good show. Totally agree that the attitude plays a part. Thanks, June. You can have all the brains but no confidence in your capability because of no fitting in. Absolutely. Kyle King, what are your thoughts on equality in terms of, do you think equality should be equal opportunity or equal outcome? I don't think you can legislate for equality of outcome. I think you can have an ideal of what you're shooting for. People are different. Say I had a twin brother, and we both grew up in the same household. We're exposed to the same social forces, the same emotional experiences, the same adversities, and one of us end up in jail, and the other one becomes, whatever, what I'm doing. How do you explain that? Of course, people will use an argument like that to refute the existence of class altogether. It's more complicated than that, but I think equality of opportunity is the key. And then people can rise and fall based on aspects of what they're bringing to the table and how they deal with certain things. In a situation like that, the concept of merit would become a lot more useful. Always amazes me how much more confident privately educated people are. Absolutely. Today I was watching clips of the Leveson inquiry for research for the book, and I was listening to Ian Hislop giving his testimony at it, and how funny he was, how witty he was, but also at points, just very, very confident. I mean, they all were. And then I watched him at a select committee where he was being interviewed by politicians, and the politicians trying to speak to him. Now, don't get me wrong, the politicians obfuscating, the politicians talking shite, basically. The politicians saying, don't say what you're saying about HSBC and people who work at Deloitte and Touche also writing legislation for the government, because those people aren't here to defend themselves. And the point he was making was, you have to get legislation in place that says if you're a public servant, you can't then go and take a job working for one of the companies that are benefiting from legislation that you were writing. But it was just so confident, he cut over the politician, he talked over him, and only a person from a certain kind of background would do that. I work in private education now, but have worked in state schools. It's incredibly telling from 7 years old how confidence is taught. I've spent time in obviously both settings, and the environment, the contextual factors, the differences between them are striking, particularly just what the educational environments entail on both sides of the divide. Private schools, particularly boarding schools, they're like their own little town, you know. They've got their own little road system and their own theatre, and basically everything is there to optimize all of the potential of everyone who goes there, which means even someone who might naturally not be quite academic can still be raised higher than a kid from a poorer background who is academically bright. And I think that's why a lot of, not everyone who's going to private schools from a rich family. I mean, a lot of middle class parents are taking a massive financial risk doing it, you know. But they see it as the best way to give their children the best opportunity available. Grim O'Grady, excuse me. The governments don't take on the class all at once. They pick off small groups, all from the working class. We need unity. It's the old adage of an injury to one is an injury to all. Yeah, I guess that is quite true. And if you just look at it strategically and which is kind of, I try more now not to think in terms of good and evil, and good and bad, and moral and immoral. Although sometimes you do have to point these things out and kind of take it there. But more and more, I try to just think of what is the outcome? What's the material outcome of a specific kind of transaction? What's the difference between the rhetoric and what's actually what the output is? What are the interests at play? Because everyone can say something like, I mean, I think everyone in the country wants there to be less drug deaths. We all agree that we want less drug deaths. But the question is, what are the interests of all of the different players involved? And would that tell us something about why it's taken so long to get a cast iron commitment to increasing funding? Once you understand the interests of the players involved, then you can then adjust what your strategy is based on understanding the interests at play and making an offer somebody can't refuse. You know, that's what it comes down to. I think that's what a lot of political activism, particularly the stuff we covered in there. I like when Keith said also as well, he's one of the guys in Pollock, one of the activists in those early days. And when he said this wasn't a thing for the intellectuals, this was grassroots, you know. And I think we're in a place right now where we have that same tension. There's I've got a chapter in my book. I can tell you a bit about the book now. So the book comes in 7 parts. It's more conventionally structured than the first book, and it's broader in scale. So the first part of the book is just establishing the existence of class in a lot of the ways that you've seen in the show. We jump from prisons and I examined Don't Grass, the philosophy of Don't Grass, which at its root is a class concern. And then we jump to land ownership and we jump to land inequality and we look at different interests and conflicts. Then part 2 is about proximity. So the distance between you and a social problem, how close you are to it, is quite significant in terms of your ability to understand it. And the issue of proximity looms quite large over lots of aspects of our society because we have a political class that's often largely learning on the job. People aren't interviewed to find out what their suitability is to be in charge of prison reform. They get thrown in there based on the political utility to a leader. And then they learn on the job from civil servants and permanent secretaries about what actually prison reform is about or what probation is about. So part 2 is covered in that. part 3 is then called Death by 1,000 Cuts, and austerity in high definition. And that's just an examination of austerity, with particular attention being paid to suicide, drug deaths, and homelessness, which I think are the 3 harshest outcomes that we've seen. Then we move to where is it? The Hostility Doctrine, which is an examination of conservatism, conservative policy. And then part 5 is an examination of the left, which obviously exists primarily not just to fight for things that the left wants, but also as a counterweight to conservative excess. And unfortunately, the left has been unable to perform that function. And this for a number of reasons. And one of them is, in the social media age, a lot of leftism's become this kind of, it's back in that intellectual place again. And there's a chapter I've got called the Ideological Superego, which is making the argument that in the culture war, whether you think it's relevant or not, all these issues around free speech and the rights for this group and rights for that, and how we talk about things and pronouns and blah, blah, blah. Like, forget that specifically, but on issues like immigration, I think a lot of us on the left, we were too slow to bring a class analysis into immigration concern, because the ascendant narrative was all about Brexit, which was about characterising one side as open-minded, forward-thinking citizens of the world, and the other side as sort of white van men and racists, and well, there was certainly a strong contingent of xenophobia within the Brexit movement. If you look at a lot of the data, then you find that the Brexit vote wasn't necessarily stronger in areas with high levels of immigration. It was stronger in areas where the fundamentals of the economy, education, employment, and aging population, and poor planning and management by local authorities. And these were things that preceded even our membership of the European Union. But I think we were a bit slow to get in, because we were a bit slow to get in and make those difficult arguments around immigration, because it was the peak of the culture war. And a lot of us were there was this ideological superego, which was, I can't say that, even though I'm in a community right now where I know not everyone who has concerns about immigration is racist, because some of the people who have concerns are people of colour. And their concerns are the same as the white people. You can argue till the cows come home about the merit of those concerns, but a lot of attitude surveys and data that's available shows that significant numbers of ethnic minorities have concerns about immigration. They want there to be controls that mean we understand what a person is going to bring to the economy, So that's what I enjoyed about that episode. When Keith said that, I know I went off on a wee bit of a tangent there, but when Keith said that, it placed a lot of my concerns that I've had and things that I write about in context, and that is to say that this battle between intellectuals and the grassroots is always there. And I just want to encourage grassroots activists to untether from that ideological superego, that concern about, well, how will other lefties think if I say this? Or what will the movement think if I say this? Trust their instincts more. It's important to have an ideology. It's not important to have an ideological superego, which is really just self-concern about how your thing plays in a broader theatre of politics. Anyway, who knows? Could be a load of shite. Miss Jordan, on Anywhere But Westminster by The Guardian showed communities in England when ethnic minorities were pro-Brexit and saying don't let any more immigrants in. Absolutely. I was in Margate in 2019. This is Brexit country. This is a seaside town that's been in decline since the onset of mass air travel, right? So for as long as you've been able to get on an airplane and go on holiday, these towns have been in decline, right? And what did they do? They built retail parks, which further decimated the local economy, right? They flooded the places with off licenses and all the usual stuff that you see. And certain streets, you know, I visited a street that the energy just changed when you walked into the street. It felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the air. You know, you've got these classic architecturally significant buildings all down the street, but they've just all fallen into disrepair, windows boarded up. So these used to be guest houses for tourists, which then were turned into multiple occupancy homes. And so then your Eastern European immigrants are getting put there. And you've got 8 families living in a close, and the landlords are taking the money, but they're not sorting out the property. And then what happens is, you know, there's nowhere for the bins to be, right? So the bins get left in the open air in the street because there's not a designated area for them. And what happens, you know, the seagulls come down at night and just raid the bins, and then the rubbish is everywhere, and this adds to an impression that people of a certain racial background are just filthy and don't care about the community. Now, obviously, you're going to have differences, and some people are going to make more effort than others, but that could be said of any ethnic group. There's not an essential quality to Eastern Europeans, you know, that just makes them like really want to just walk around in their own filth. And if you look at you know, Thanet Council, Thanet being the district that Margate is in, there's been corruption going on in that council for years. It's distrusted and has been for years. And a report into the council revealed that it's dysfunctional, and literally that it requires rehabilitation, right? All those people who could no longer afford London or Brighton moved to Margate. Yep, the London overspill, which then distorts the housing market. So people from London move to Margate to get more bang for their buck. They buy up houses. They drive up house prices. They drive up the cost of living. And so it's almost in an area like that, it's everything but immigration that's the real problem. There's long-standing factors. There's more recent factors like austerity. And then obviously COVID now. But then there's all of these other influxes of white Londoners that is just completely reshaping the economic topography of the area in ways that escape the notice of the average punter on the street who's developed through chronic stress of living in poverty an emotional resentment about somebody with a different colour of skin. And then Nigel Farage appears and says, you're right, and takes a lot of people for a ride, in my opinion. And I don't mean in terms of the Brexit vote. I mean in terms of going down this rabbit hole of xenophobia. My best episode was the first one on identity. You have to speak a certain way and act a certain way to get taken seriously in education. It could be a trap. Do you agree? Absolutely, I agree. I made the episode, so I definitely agree. There's nothing there in that show that you see that's not that I'm not standing behind as in terms of what my view is. The start of every show says this is what I think. You know, and obviously a lot of what we see in this show is a result of the director bringing things to the table, a lot of things to the table. The section on the Black Report was Stephen's idea. Specifically, a lot of the sequences come out of early conversations Stephen and I had, where I was talking in a general way about things I would like to see You know, why do we focus on benefit fraud and not tax evasion? Talking about language, talking about these prevailing sensibilities that emerge from different class conflicts and interests and how they clash. So really a kind of theoretical idea about let's do something about class, but let's do it in a way that no one's covered it before. But it was really a lot of the sequences in terms of contributors and further research was a result of Stephen going away and going, right, okay, let's see how we actually get this on its feet. You no doubt be aware of the issues and challenges that Blackpool faces, but we're trying our best. I'm sure. I mean, of all the kind of seaside destinations, I think Blackpool's one that's probably done better than a lot of other ones, maybe as a result of its location and the fact it's probably the most famous. But I know that there's still going to be significant issues there, regardless. Bright series, enjoy your programs, keep up the great work. Thanks, Anthony. Darren, I'm from Blackpool, but my dad was born in Pollock. You do fantastic work. How could I get a signed copy of your book, Poverty Safari? You could get a signed. I was actually supposed to come to Blackpool. Funny story. In 2019, and I got a phone call as I was sitting in a Cafe Nero about to go to the recording studio to work on this album that I'm still working on. And I got a phone call saying, we're just wondering where you are. And it was a community worker in Blackpool. I had forgotten to go to Blackpool. Totally forgot. So I ended up apologising. I was really embarrassed. And then I wrote a song about it on the spot. Called I Know You're Busy, But, and the song's just about me being so busy I just forget things. But people keep asking me to do stuff and they always start the request with I know you're busy, but, and then I just forget. So I probably will get down to Blackpool at some point. So keep an eye out. Definitely like take my kids there, you know. I mean, but Blackpool has a certain quality. There's some aspects I probably wouldn't take my kids to. But big, tall, high things, and big, noisy, fast things. I love them. My kids love them. And if it's sunny, then even better. Then I'm going to go up the chat just to see if there are questions I've missed. We've had the Clack Manager thing. It's funny how Clack Manager is just synonymous now with Better Together. And like, because that was the first vote. It's just like anytime it's like trauma. Sorry if there's any no voters in here. Well, I'm not sorry. You know, you won, so fuck you. Congratulations. Magnanimous as ever. Let's get up here. Any more questions? What's your advice for someone sitting? All right, okay, I've answered that one. Have you been asked to remove or rephrase any parts of your series, or do BBC Scotland give you free to put forward your opinion? Good question. No. What happens sometimes is there might be a turn of phrase that I say that could be taken out of context. So say, for example, I say something like, that exam algorithm was a stab in the back for school kids, right? I know what I mean by that. I understand my intention when I say that. But a violent metaphor might not be the most appropriate way and might create a kind of a controversy which is unhelpful to the show. So sometimes decisions might be taken at editorial level which are pretty obvious to me. What also will happen is, For certain sequences, I'll have a rough guide to follow, which is laid out in a script. And depending on what I'm given, I might rewrite aspects of it, just so that tonally it matches my style of speaking. But I'll never say anything on there that I don't believe. And nothing will be put in front of me with the expectation, because we understand going into it. You know, none of us are around the table in the first place unless that's part of the deal. I have a worrying amount of sway, and I try to be responsible with that, because one, I'm not the only person on the project who's passionate. I'm not the only person on the project who has experience of certain things, and I don't know everything. So I find it getting the balance right between recognizing that you have certain degree of freedom, but that should be exercised responsibly and not gratuitously, out of respect for the other voices, particularly the voice of the director, Stephen Bennett. We're on the same page on most of the things. By the time we're shooting, most of the issues have been resolved in terms of what's it about, what is the angle, what are we trying to do with this. And what Stephen does a good job with also, as well as the cinematography and being very diligent with a lot of the research, is just how the programs are structured and sequenced. You know, we're jumping from one subject to the other, but it doesn't feel too jarring. But also the links aren't contrived. It's not like an Adam Curtis film. This is a film about how everyone has become like Richard Nixon, but it was all a fantasy. But at the same time, in Cambodia, a wee guy called Jimmy. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not like that. Liam, did you end up getting into the dressing up? Well, the producer's like, Darren, you don't need to dress up as a Roman. And you're like, get me my shield. No, actually. That was an aspect of it that I was less comfortable with. But it's because I'm into, obviously, like, I'm into hip hop, right? I'm into comedy and all that. So understand that there's a trope in with black comedians in America, where every single famous black comedian has had to dress up as a woman at some point in their career, right? And there are different theories about why that is. And it's Dave Chappelle who notes this, and he tells his experience of refusing to do it when he's asked to do it. He's just like, nah, nothing against it, just I'm not doing it, you know. And so there was a part of me initially that was not necessarily resistant. I don't mind doing stuff and having a laugh and making a bit of a fool of myself. And I wanted this program to be, as much as it's probably more serious than the first series, I wanted it to be a bit lighter in tone. Because actually, as a person, I like to have a laugh. And I'm not always angry all the time, you know? So dressing up and getting into it like that was a way of doing that. But also visually, it's important because over the course of an hour, it can be quite draining mentally. And so I understood through speaking to Stephen that he wouldn't make a decision about me doing something that wasn't necessary in some visual level for making the film more palatable throughout the course of a whole hour. So I just saw it as something that it was just a kind of taking one for the team, you know. Obviously, you're a bit self-conscious, but that's when I started to kind of realize what I alluded to in one of the other episodes, having this well, a kind of super ego almost. I always kind of think, what are people where I come from going to think of this? Do you know what I mean? And it's weird because that's if I'm so far from that background now. I don't think what are people in the hip hop scene going to think. I think of this imaginary cohort of people from Pollock watching it, and I think actually when I think about it, it's just baggage that I carry. No, it's baggage that I carry from, you know, trying to be different in a scheme where you it's very clear what's expected of you behaviorally and linguistically, um and if you step outside that, it's a fight, sometimes literally. Long shot, I know, but can you remember that song you made that has the line, "The bookies opens before the bakers"? Class Ceiling, it's on the Trigger Warning album. The Trigger Warning album is also a sequel to the Friendly World album and a prequel to the Government Issue Music Protest album. You can go into my music and listen to whatever you want and not know about all these different connections, but you'll be rewarded for going deeper, you know? It's like the Marvel universe, except it's all me. Do you know what I mean? I'm Iron Man and the Hulk. Uh, Sam Richardson, Darren, given how well you took to Erin in last week's episode and generally how well you've given coverage to young people, what are your thoughts on votes at 16? Obviously, it varies. If you can join the army, I don't see why you can't vote. You can get married, I don't see why you can't vote. You can buy fags, I don't see why you can't vote. So that's my answer. Okay, couple more minutes and then we'll give it and then we'll say cheerio. Love the guy from Commonwealth's quote about being benefits, claiming it's a Hunger Games armed with only a biro. His name's Robin McAlpine. He's quite a prominent figure in the Yes movement. Not as visible now as he was. An intelligent man. Pretty dedicated to what he's been doing. Has a lot of insight. You know, being a former lobbyist, I think that helps him to understand the strategy, you know, in terms of politicians and the political class and the relationship between them and special interests and things like that. So it was an interesting conversation that we had. A little behind the scenes thing that you won't know. We were filming in a part of Edinburgh which we didn't know was actually privately owned. So while we were having our conversation and Robin walks with a walking stick, so the sequence was complex because we've got lots of moving parts walking down the street, and then a security guard comes out and he said, "You can't film here without permission," and we're like, and he was a bit aggro about it. So then I got a bit aggro about it, and it turned out it was a private street. We couldn't film there. So even, you know, literally the only thing that was publicly owned was the road, which they all use to come to their private street that you and I pay for. Anyway, I think what it was basically it was COVID time. We were all in lockdown, and I think you must just have a lot of security guards that are really desperate to show their bosses that they can actually do the business, and they just thought, "Here's the only opportunity I've had for months, you know, to be a dick, and I'm gonna take that opportunity." Darren, you're influential. You're our voice out there. I put up a solidarity fist during the program at United Workers. It was tearful out of frustration that we affect over and feel helpless. That's lovely, Katrina. I try to do what I can. I'm not as close to the action as I used to be, but I just I have unfinished business in terms of, I think, as an activist and as someone from a working class background. I think at some point I will retire my jersey because I'll get older and I'll talk shite, you know, even more shite than I do now. And I think, you know, you've got a lot of younger people coming in and they're a lot more dynamic and it's more relevant. And I would like to move on to other subjects, you know what I mean, to talk about mental health, trauma, maybe even get into other things, writing drama or something, and channel into that sort of stuff. I don't think I can be this kind of class warrior my entire life, because I see how other people have slipped into self-parody with it, no matter how intelligent or insightful they happen to be. Are you doing a post-show party next week? Yes, I will be. So you can join me then. And apologies to anyone who was on last week on the other stream. There was a technical problem. I figured out what it was. I set up the stream on my phone, and then I tried to go on YouTube on my laptop, and I don't think it really recognized. I think it was already connected to the camera on my phone, so there was no go live button on my laptop. So apologies for that. Right, guys, grateful to you for joining me. Next week is the final episode, and I look forward to chatting with you all. Just one last question there. When will your book be out? I don't know, but it's getting better the longer I take, and this COVID scenario has really concentrated my mind. So, I'll be out when it's out. Probably spring 2022. All right. Thanks, guys. All the best. Take care. Right.